Welcome back to the Developer Odyssey episode number 7. This one's entitled Understanding the Internet. That sounds like a very broad statement, but basically the goal of this is really just kind of to talk through how a basic website interaction actually works. And again, we're focusing mostly on web applications or website design because that's the field that I'm in. If you're looking to do some other type of development like game development or app development or something like that, this one may not apply to you quite as much as those who are looking to do something in web development. So you might want to skip over this one if you don't find it helpful to you, but maybe you'll just find it a little entertaining somewhere along the way. As always, if this is the first video that you found in this playlist, there will be a link below in the description where you can go back and view really from the beginning on if you want to kind of watch everything in order, or you can jump around from one video to another, the things that you are interested in this playlist. So a couple of things with this topic of understanding the internet. Obviously, that could be very broad. It could be very lengthy. Hopefully we'll try to keep it pretty short for this video. But my goal really is just to kind of give you a high level understanding of how a website generally works these days, or how a web application generally works, so that you can decide what parts of it you might be interested in working on, get familiar with some of the terminology, and just kind of have a little bit of understanding as you go into learning about websites and web design and web application development. My goal is for you to have a basic understanding of just kind of how things generally work, so that as you jump into your training, you'll be familiar with terminology, you'll have a better understanding of things that you want to focus on, and just really to kind of get you familiar with what we're actually dealing with. So we're going to spend a lot of time looking at the screen. I will, put my little face down there so you can see me. Maybe I'll do a half split screen or something. I don't know. It'll depend on what we do in editing. But we're going to spend some time looking at the screen so that we can explain generally what's going on when you're interacting with the internet from your computer. So there are two basic parts to web design or web application development, and those are typically called the front end and the back end, or other terms that we use are the client and the back end, or the client and the server. So the client is going to be the front end and the server is going to be the back end. And really what that comes down to is what machine is actually doing the work. So if we're talking about the client machine, we're actually talking about your computer, the computer that is accessing the internet, the computer that's going out there trying to find the things that you're wanting to find, whether it's Google, or whether it's, some website that you're on, or a social media website. That is the client. If you think of it this way, the client makes a request and the server serves the request to the client. Just like in business, if you're asking somebody to do something for you, like paint your house or something like that, you're the client and you're asking them to provide a service, and then they serve you. They give that service to you. So that's really what's happening between your computer and the server, which is basically just another computer or bunch of computers, really, depending on where it's at. A server is basically just another computer with specific software on it in order to work as a server. Again, this is really high level, guys. So if there's somebody watching this, you know all the ins and outs and the details a lot further down. Please don't roast me in the comments. But this is just high level so that people get a basic understanding of how this works. Okay, so those are the two parts of this process, the client side and the server side, or what we often call the front end and the back end. So be familiar with those two terms. We're going to use those a lot as we dive into this whole process of how the internet works. All right, so the first part of the process is called user input. That's where you go to your computer and you type in a URL, or you click on a link, and you are inputting some sort of information. You are saying, you're making the request. Basically, you're saying, I want to do this. I'm doing user input, right? So I'm filling out a URL, or I'm clicking on a URL saying I'm initiating the process. So that's the user input and that is done on the client. So you can see we've done that here with devmentordave.com. And if you're not familiar with devmentordave.com, this really is the only page that's accessible right now to the public. And that is just a form that is there so that you all can send me requests, questions, things like that. Obviously, don't forget we have the Discord channel as well that just recently launched. So feel free to jump on the Discord channel. The link should be in the description of this video as well. All right, so we've made this user input devmentordave.com. Now, what's going to happen after this, when I click the enter button, everything just kind of stayed the same because we're already on that page. But there's a lot of things that just happened from the time I click the button to the time that the little spinning thing stops spinning, saying, hey, your page has loaded. The first thing that happened is your computer keeps what's called a DNS cache. That means a domain name server cache or storage. So it is keeping track of all the different IP addresses of all the websites that you visited unless you've cleared that cache out. What in the world is a domain name system? Well, a domain name system basically takes the text that we use for a website name, like devmentordave.com, and it matches it to an IP address, which is like 1.1.1.1, for a very simple IP address, right? Or that you've got IPv6 now, which is all kinds of more fun. But you've got the domain name, which is devmentordave.com, and it matches that with the IP address of the server, sort of, that's hosting your website that you're trying to access, or your web application that you're trying to access. So your computer has an IP address and the server has an IP address. Pretty much any sort of electronic that connects to the internet has an IP address, either an IPv4 address, which is that 4 sections separated by dots, or IPv6 address. And we won't go into detail on all that, but basically all those different electronics have IP addresses. And what a domain name system does is it matches the domain name, the devmentordave.com, with the IP address of the server that's hosting the website. Now, if your computer doesn't have that stored, if it's a new website you've not been to before, or maybe you've cleared your cache out, then it's actually going to go out and it's going to check with the domain name service that's closest to it to see if that has a record. That domain name server or service is going to respond to your client, to your computer, with the IP address for devmentordave.com. Now we can actually find out what that IP address is by doing our own lookup. As you'll see here, we've got the nslookup.io website, and I've already done a search for devmentordave.com, and you can see that we have IPv4 addresses and IPv6 addresses, and these are hosted by Cloudflare. So actually, the server actually isn't Cloudflare. Cloudflare is a go-between, which we won't go into detail on. But as you can see here, we've got an IP address here, or an IP address here, or our IPv6 addresses. So in the background, your client is going to be getting this IP address from the domain name service, and then it's going to actually make its real request going to devmentordave.com to that IP address. Now, this is called the HTTP request. That stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Again, we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail about that, just so you're familiar with that terminology. An HTTP request, that's your computer making a request to a server. Now, depending on the type of request that you're sending to the server is going to do one or two or multiple things in order to serve the client. Generally, when you go to a website, you're doing what's called a GET request. You're just saying, hey, get me this web page. If you were to fill out this form, you would be doing what's called a POST request. We're going to post some information to the server. So on a GET request, the server is just going to get the information requested and send it back. Now, in this case, it's basically sending back all the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript that is needed so that the client can show the website in the browser. But if you're doing something like a post request where you're sending information to the server, it might store that information somewhere, or use that information to filter the data that it sends back, or to decide that it needs different information to send back to the client. And so then it would send information back to the client. So far we've had a user input information. We've done a DNS check to find out what the IP address is of the server. And then we've made that request to the server. And then the server is now processing that information. Once the server has processed that information completely and it's got exactly what it needs in order to serve, it's going to return an HTTP response. Now, if you notice, that's HTTP request and HTTP response, right? So we're making a request and we're getting back a response. Now, this response will have everything that we need so that the browser or the client can actually render the web page, build the web page, show the web page, whether it's a website or a web application, and make it look like we're expecting it to look when we visit that website. And this is what we call client rendering. It's taking the information, the code, and it's using its built-in processes to read that code and understand that code and then display what that code tells it to display. So typically that's going to include HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are the main things that you're going to see coming back from the web server. Now, sometimes that'll all come back in one response, or sometimes the website will actually make multiple requests to the server. And in fact, I want to show you that now. If you're using Chrome and you click F12 on your browser, then it will open up this thing called DevTools. And DevTools is really helpful for web application developers and website developers to test things and just to kind of see what's going on. And there's multiple tabs here. The first tab is Elements. You can see all the different HTML tags. We're not going to dig into that today. I'll leave that to your training staff, whoever's teaching you how to actually code. But we're going to look at network. All right. Because remember what we said, we're making requests via the network, via the internet, right? So we're going to be sending requests and receiving information back. So this is how we can see what that looks like. I'm just going to reload the page here. Now you'll notice that we've got devmentordave.com, and that came back with a bunch of HTML. So we can look at the response. Here's our request up here. We did a get request and we just posted to the URL, or got the URL. So we didn't make any specific information, give it anything that we wanted it to give us other than just the website, right? And then we have the response. And this is a preview, just kind of gives you a preview of what it would look like. And that's helpful with other things. But we have the response, which is all this HTML. We've got some styles that are part of the HTML code that are CSS there. We've got other tags. So here's some JavaScript right here. But then we've got some other tags that are part of this HTML that are making other requests kind of in the background here. So we've got this jQuery that's being loaded. So we're asking for this file to come back so that we can use that in our HTML website page. So we've got 4 different JavaScript files when we're making separate requests to get those. Now, one of the reasons why you would do this is so that this page comes back very quickly, because the more things that you're trying to load from the server at one time, the slower that response is going to be. And so we want to make sure that we get the website to load as quickly as we can, or the web application to load as quickly as can. And then sometimes we'll make other requests to get data kind of after that page is loaded so that we give a nice user experience. So each one of these are requests, and they're all GET requests. And we won't go into the structure of a GET request and things like that, but this is just so that you understand what's going on. So we're sending all of these requests to the server, and the server is responding with different types of information for the different requests that we're making. You can even see here that the images are coming from the server. The information is coming as far as what those images are. We're making a request out to where those images are stored, which in this case is actually on Amazon S3. So we're making requests out to our hosting account, and we're also making requests out to this file storage account. So we're making requests actually to multiple different places, and that's all based on those DNS records giving us the IP addresses back. So again, you put information into your browser, that information goes in either because of a button click or a link click or a URL that you typed in. It goes and finds the IP address for each of those different things, and then it makes the request to the server. The server sends back the information that we need, and then the client takes that information and builds or renders the web page or the web application so that we can actually interact with it further. Now, one nice feature that a lot of websites have is caching. And so what they'll do is they'll actually take the requests that are coming in and they'll store them in case somebody makes the exact same request. They don't have to go find the information again. They don't have to go search the database again. If it's a website or a web application that's using a database, they don't have to go through that whole process. They can just send it right back so that it's a faster experience as well. So that's another nice feature on the server side or on the backend side. Often that happens. Sometimes that happens on the client as well. It'll store websites that you visited so that you can load them fast. You can interact with them faster. And you don't have to sit there and wait for them to load, even though most of the time it's just like a second or two. Now, today we have websites and web applications that are basically constantly keeping connections with the back end. In fact, there's even some connections that they'll keep the whole time that you have that website open in the browser using something called sockets. And again, we won't go into that into detail, but there's this constant communication between the front end and the back end so that as you're interacting with the web page, even without changing pages, you can manipulate information and get new information and updates to the website that you're viewing. Maybe it's a dashboard or something like that, and it's constantly updating information that other people are inputting. That's what happens in like a chat application or something like that. So the web applications that we build today are just constantly going through this process of communicating back and forth between the front end and the back end. And hopefully that at least gives you an idea of how those things interact so that when you are learning, when you're listening to a tutorial, when you're following along there in your boot camp or whatever it is that you're doing for your learning process, you understand a little bit better what exactly is going on there between your website, your computer called the client, and the server and the backend, and how those requests are going back and forth. Again, this is a super high level overview of how that works, and you'll get into some of those pieces in a lot more detail as you learn more as a junior developer. But hopefully this at least gives you a little bit of an insight if you didn't know how it worked before, just so that you understand what exactly is going on when I push the enter button or when I click on something there on that website. How is all that actually working? Hopefully this gives you a little bit of a help in understanding what is actually going on in that process. Hey, if you're finding this series helpful, I'd appreciate it if you'd click the like button. Of course, if you've not subscribed, I'd love it if you would subscribe. We're trying to reach 5,000 subscribers here in the year of 2024. So if you're at all interested in what we're doing here, I'd request that you subscribe. That way you get notified the next time I upload a video in this series or upload a random video or a different series or anything else that we do here on YouTube. You'll be notified of that as well. Thanks for spending time with me today, and I'll see you on the next video here in our Developer Odyssey series.